Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Come Back Stronger, where we bring you stories from around the world, mostly from North Florida, talking about people who have overcome obstacles, injuries, and setbacks, and have turned their life around and come back even stronger than ever.
That's right.
And so I'm here with my law partner, Dana Brooks, and today we have a very special guest for you, and we're talking about our state representative, Allison Tant. And Dana, you know Allison. Tell us what you think of Allison.
I love Allison. She's one of my sheroes. She does so much for so many. I have followed her personally and in her career for many, many years now. She is a lawyer. She's a former lobbyist with the big firms, power player, and she has had a very, very illustrious career. She served as the head of the Democratic Party for a long time. She ran for office and just went in, on a huge wave. Everybody loves her.
Yeah, she's great.
She's done everything. She does so much to our community, but she also has a lot of challenges people don't really see until she calls attention to them. Like so many people who look like they have it together.
You would never know by looking at her and looking at how successful she is, and that she actually comes from very humble beginnings. Her father was an orphan. Her mother was in poverty, and she was the first person in her family to go to college. But she's now a big-time state representative, and before that, she was a super high-powered lobbyist with one of actually the most powerful law firms in the country. So anyway, she's got a story to tell too, and so we can't wait for you to hear this story. We're going to go to a commercial and come back in just a minute.
I recently had a new client, and she suffered a mild traumatic brain injury. And she had no idea what had happened that caused her to be injured.
Gotcha.
But it turns out she had fallen into a pit at an oil change station. And it was 100% their fault.
Oh wow!
But
her injury made her not even understand
her injury, and
it
makes me so frustrated because folks that suffer concussions or mild traumatic brain injuries, it's really difficult for them to know what happened and to understand the difference in what their life was and what it is now because of the nature of their condition. And so the insurance companies need to recognize the full value of that.
Instead of taking advantage of that very unique situation.
It took her family telling her, you need to call an attorney. Her family coming with her to the appointment to say, these are the differences, to get her in there, and now we're able to help her.
I love that.
Welcome back to Come Back Stronger, where we are interviewing today State Representative Allison Tant. We're going to hear her story. She has had some challenges that she's had to overcome, and she has created a career where she's helping the people that she's had to help through the challenges she faced with her son. Here we are for the interview right now.
So Allison Tant, or Representative Allison Tant, I should say, thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
So I'd like to talk to you about your son, Jeremy. But before we talk about Jeremy, what was your, well, let me start it this way. Your life was on an upward trajectory. You had an amazing career, a whole life planned out for yourself, and you had your son Jeremy, and Jeremy was born with some disabilities, and that kind of set your life on a whole different trajectory.
Yes, it did.
In a new amazing way. So I want to talk about the whole thing. So let's start with where you were before Jeremy was born and what was happening.
So before Jeremy was born, I was a lobbyist with Steele, Hector, and Davis, and then Holland and Knight. I had been in the legislative arena for either on staff or in an advocacy position for 18 years, and I was representing Fortune 100 and 500 businesses. I was lucky to have the ability to work with corporate presidents, vice presidents, and actually have a hand in shaping good public policy on behalf of those businesses and business interests in Florida. And
let me just interrupt you real quick, because for people that don't know, Steele, Hector, and Holland and Knight are two of the world's biggest law firms.
Correct.
The most prestigious law firms, not just in our country and in our state, but across the world.
Correct.
So they have huge clients. So I want to make sure to drive that home with our viewers, because you were an incredibly powerful lobbyist for two of the most incredibly powerful law firms in the world.
Yes, it was quite exciting.
Yeah.
And it was something that I had not anticipated. Here I am, the daughter of my mother was one of 8 children who grew up in poverty, and my dad grew up in an orphanage. And she said to me, both of my parents said, "You're going to go to college. I don't care what else you think about in life. Don't think about getting married first. You're going to go to college." And so I did, and then found myself in this trajectory of doing that. And so my husband and I got married in 1998, and 1996, and my twins were born in 1998. And Jeremy we had a very high-risk pregnancy. We had problems in utero. We did not know what his condition was. We just knew he was struggling, and so we were seeing specialists week after week throughout the pregnancy, and we were monitoring the blood flow through the umbilical cord, because if it went the wrong way, which I didn't know it did, that we had only had a finite amount of time to get him out before we might lose him. So it was a very difficult time. And then he was born, and he was only 2 pounds 10 ounces at birth.
Oh,
so
he was a little
itty
peanut.
bitty. Yes, and they were only 4.5 weeks, 5.5 weeks rather, premature. But he just didn't grow. He stopped growing at 28 weeks gestation and didn't get any bigger. So then that kind of started us on this path of what's going on with him, and meeting his needs. And at 4 months, he was diagnosed with a condition called Williams syndrome.
What year was he born, Allison?
1998.
Okay.
And so they were born, the twins were born in July of 1998, and he was diagnosed in December of 1998.
Okay.
So maybe 5 months, just before their 5th month of age, he was diagnosed with that condition. And my doctor called me on a Friday, and he said, and I said, "Does he have the condition you thought?" He said, "Well, he's got a condition, and it is a big one." And he said it's marked by a heart condition, and it impacts both developmental delay cognition and developmental delay physical. And he said, this was a Friday, mind you, and he said, "I'm not telling you he's going to die tonight, but you need to get him to Shands." And so luckily, because of my advocacy in the legislative arena, I knew the folks at Shands and had an appointment with them on Monday, where he was diagnosed with Williams syndrome through a genetic test, and then it kicked off a whole different path in my life, including 5 therapies 3 times a week for early intervention. So my life revolved around that. My other baby's life revolved around that. And then we had to have open heart surgery when he was 23 months old.
Let me ask you real quick, what exactly is Williams syndrome? Because people don't talk about it very often.
No, it's a rare condition. So it affects about 1 in... I've seen different stats, 7,500, I think it's really around 20,000, 1 in 20,000 births. And it is a condition that's a microdeletion on the 11th chromosome, and it is evidenced largely through a heart condition as well as extremely slow or very slow developmental growth. So he's also small stature, which is another hallmark of the condition. And was diagnosed through what's called a FISH test, and I used to know what that stood for, but I don't anymore.
So it's an acronym.
And it's a genetic test, right. And so at any rate, so he was diagnosed with that condition, and it's pretty rare. The cognitive profile is similar to a child with Down syndrome, but different strengths and weaknesses. So, and he has been in exceptional student education through K-12 his entire life, actually starting in pre-K. So I began to my life flipped from advocating on behalf of big corporations and those who really wanted to be responsible corporate citizens to the least among us, including my son. And I will tell you, I remember sitting in an IEP meeting, an individual education plan meeting, which is a legally binding document that governs a child's education in school. And I was being railroaded, and I knew I was being railroaded.
What do you mean by that?
There were 20 people in the room, and I knew it was going to come down to who thinks Jeremy needs services, and Mom's hand's going to go up, and the rest of them are going to say no. I could tell. They rolled their big titles out, their names out, and I remember thinking, if I'm feeling ambushed, what is another mother who maybe has a child far more disabled, no supportive husband? maybe has 2 or 3 jobs, can't even make one of these meetings, or someone who doesn't speak the language, someone who has no transportation to get to such a meeting. And in that moment, I just thought, if I don't do this, and I remember thinking, I'm so tired. I just want to be a mom. I want to make mud pies and play and bake cookies and just, run around. And in that moment, I thought, well, there's no better client. So I'm going to suit up. I'm going to get to work. And so that then changed the trajectory of my life going into seeking change and seeking better treatment for people with disabilities.
Let me back up. I want to back up way before you got married, before Jeremy, before everything, before school. You mentioned something earlier that your dad was in an orphanage and that your mom was what?
She was one of 8 children.
Okay.
And they grew up, my mom grew up, both of them were from North Carolina. My mom's father, it was just the height of the Depression.
Yeah,
and so my grandfather was always out looking for work. And every time he came home, my grandmother ended up pregnant with another baby. And so there were 8 children.
Yeah.
And so in order to help feed one another, they picked berries and tobacco in the fields of North Carolina for pennies on that pint at the end of a row to help put food on the family table. And
sharecroppers, so to speak. Yeah.
My mother lived with food insecurity. So that's why what happens in Tallahassee in the 32304 really is personal to me.
Well, and I have to say, and I've got to wrap up in a minute or so I'll be brief, but I have to say that, you come across, you're beautiful, you're well collected, you're well spoken, and people probably don't know when they see you or when they talk to you that you weren't privileged. You didn't come from a privileged background.
No.
You were the first person in your family to go to college.
Yes.
And I think that's a really important side of your story that I want people to know about.
Right. My father grew up in an orphanage because his father had abandoned them and put him in an orphanage. And so growing up, I lived in a home my dad built. With his own hands. We had a garden to supplement our grocery bill, and my dad went fishing, and we had crab traps to help supplement the grocery bill because my mom and dad both worked, and I went to college on student loans. It wasn't like I had some sort of trust fund or inheritance or anything, and my mom said to me, this is my expectation, and they both said, you can do anything you choose to do so long as you work hard at it. So I took all that to heart, as well as, it was a great experience to get to go to college, and so I remember not wanting to take those days for granted, although I did, because every college student does to an extent. Right, but and
I don't mean to interrupt you, but when we come back, we've got to take a break. But when we're back, I want to talk more about Jeremy and what your life is like now and what you do for him and for others in his situation.
Absolutely.
Wow, Dana, I got to tell you, what I love about this story, about Allison's story, is, first of all, it has everything to do with coming back stronger.
Oh, yeah.
Because here we are, we're talking about somebody that had a skill set of advocacy. She had been doing this as a powerful lawyer, and then she goes through this terrible, painful moment, this not just moment, but this terribly painful ordeal with her son, and she uses that pain as a motivator to change her life, to not just be an advocate as a lawyer, but actually become a state representative where she can make amazing changes and actually fight for better treatment for people with disabilities.
She's doing what she's always done, which is the advocacy role, but she's doing it for everybody. Not just the people who can afford to hire Steele Hector and Holland and Knight power lobbyists. She's now said, I can do this for everybody. And if I need this with all the privilege I have now in my life that I have earned, if I have these roadblocks, what about everybody else? And I love that. That is the essence. That is the essence of Allison Tant Richards' character. Is if I'm hurting, I imagine the rest of you are too, and I can't live with it. And that's what motivates her, I think.
Yeah, and that was really powerful for her to say, because she was able to connect with the people. Because of what she's going through, she could connect with the people that were going through it even worse, and that motivated her to want to do something about it, and she has done it. That is good stuff. Deal. I mean, she is the real deal. So very nice. All right, so we're going to go to a commercial and come back for the second part of the interview with Allison Tant.
You know what's funny? When law firms advertise that they'll give a free consultation, Every consultation we give is free, unless we can get you a settlement based on your injuries.
Right.
Every time you give me a call, it's free.
Yeah.
I want you to give me a call.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to charge you unless we actually get you something for your case.
That's right. You don't have to pay me anything unless I win the case.
Right.
And on top of that, I'm going to pay for all of the court costs and the deposition costs and medical records costs and expert opinion costs. All of that's coming out of my pocket. And if we don't win the case, then we eat those costs at no charge to you.
Right. So we don't take a case we don't believe in because it's not in our interest.
Right.
And we don't minimize or devalue your case because that's also not in our interest.
Right.
So it makes everything fair.
If you have a lawyer on a contingency fee, you can hire the very best lawyer.
Welcome back, everybody, to Come Back Stronger, where we are interviewing State Representative Allison Tant. Stay tuned for the second part of the interview.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm interested to know, obviously after Jeremy was born, you sat in that, school board meeting or the meeting with all the teachers and decided that you had to be an advocate for Jeremy and other children like him. So how did that change your life?
Well, everything changed because I stopped working in the workforce. I realized I had to be present to win for him. And I became acquainted with the laws and rules. And of course, having my background, I knew how to adjust those laws and rules to address the issues that needed to be addressed. So I went down to the legislature and spoke to members of the House and Senate about what was going on. And I knew who to talk to and those who were sympathetic to families like mine.
When you say what was going on, what do you mean?
Well, children were denied speech services because of a little trick in the statute that classified speech services as a specialized service versus a regular service. And so because of that, there were secret ways that you were used to deny services. On physical and occupational services, there was a form being used which you were supposed to score a student or assess a student across categories, the final category being developmentally delayed. Instead of grading across categories, people who were doing the assessments were using that final category and assigning no points, then saying this child was not eligible for these services because they were developmentally delayed.
But you knew that he was eligible.
Well, of course, because the statute was very clear in saying what was supposed to be provided.
I see.
And the rule was in opposition to the statute.
Okay.
And so I sat in a meeting with them and I said, we're going to have a legal challenge.
So there was a big disconnect between what the laws provided and what the schools were doing for children like Jeremy, and you came in and fixed that.
I did, and I remember when and the schools called me, the Department of Education called me and said, I want you to know that every physical therapist and occupational therapist in the state is going to be retrained on how to assess students.
That's wonderful.
That
My
was
God.
that was the first time I figured out, and that was early on, that we could make a difference. And then I also knew that there was this thing called special diploma in statute, which is basically a piece of paper saying your child with disabilities came to school, good for him. It made no sense to an employer, to a college, or anything like that. So I gathered a group of moms together, and we called ourselves Keys to Exceptional Youth Success. And over the years, we've raised $206,000. We've awarded 206 scholarships, raised $405,000, and created programs out because some years we've had more money than we've had students to spend it on. So we created programs so that we could place students so that they could continue their personal and professional and lifelong learning growth like the rest of us, right? So
what kind of students are they?
They're students with cognitive disabilities like my son.
Okay.
So and
any kind of cognitive disability? Okay, so anywhere from Down syndrome to learning disabilities?
Autism to hearing loss, physical, blindness. We've supported students across the board, and some who can't go to college but want to continue their learning. So we've had day training programs that we've supported for those kids. And so we worked with Tallahassee Community College to create the Eagle Connections program, which is a collegiate-based program of academic learning with accommodations for these students to take the courses and enjoy them, with a job training component. We've just now, fresh off the press, is a new program at Lively called SOAR, and I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it is a job job certificate program just for people with cognitive disabilities. And in both cases, when after the TCC program was created, I took the model to Senator Gardner, who was in the Senate President's office at the time. He had OPAGA do a study and now created the Centers for Students with Unique Abilities, and there are consortiums of these programs all over the state now.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
And so SOAR is the next one, and they've got 6 distinct job training certificates that can be earned by a student with disabilities. And by the way, because you're a member of these consortiums, the tuition is paid for every one of these students, $7,000 per year.
Where can people find out where this information is? Is it on your website? Or?
Tallahassee Community, well, it's on the KeysBigBend.org website, so that is one place to get it. Also, TCC has Eagle Connections, and Lively has SOAR. And then we created a summer program called the Summer Institute that we worked all summer with 50 students this year, 53, out at the Adult and Community Ed program out there adjacent to Lively and Tallahassee Community College, where we teach life, social, independent living, and job skills, how to write a resume, how to interview for a job, how to put together a portfolio if you have problems with verbal skills to show that you can do the work, things of that nature. And it is we created that through Keys, my work there with Keys, and it's now become a standing program of Leon County Schools for any student from age 14 up to 35 who wants to continue to grow and learn and get a job.
That's awesome.
And it has been very rewarding. The VR program, State VR says it's one of the best in the state, and Cornell Disability Institute is coming down to observe it next summer.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
So here's my kind of last question, last thought. I think a lot of people, when you have a child with a disability, you feel like life is over.
Well, you do, and you feel very alone. You feel very alone, and you feel very isolated, and it's very stressful, very scary. I had a lot of anxiety about. My first thought was, where's he going to live when I'm dead? Who's going to take care of him? And 2, how are people going to treat him? So, in order for me to bounce back, and the way I have found my footing is to do something.
Right.
And that's what I've spent this time doing not only, but because it's extremely exciting to see these new developments. And as a legislator, I've been able to codify some of this stuff into statute, but that's how I have dealt with my anxiety and have found my footing as a mom for him, but also making sure that people like him, not just him, aren't left behind. That's
your comeback stronger story.
It is. That's how I have managed at all to maintain a sense of sanity and to turn something that could be catastrophic into turning pain into purpose.
Right, and it's amazing. Not just your purpose, though, or Jeremy's purpose, but for everybody out there that's like him or with any type of cognitive disability.
Right.
Like, thank God Jeremy was born, because if he hadn't been born, all these programs wouldn't exist. So thank you so much for everything you've been doing, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. Thanks for inviting me.
Wow.
Turning pain into purpose.
That's her.
My absolute favorite quote was, in order for me to bounce back, I had to do something.
Yeah, do something.
That's what it's all about.
Suit up and do something.
Suit up and do something. I absolutely love that. What an amazing woman. And you know what fascinates me about her is that she is not, you can tell, she's not just sitting around on her hands.
No.
She's not just sitting in some office being state representative and just, telling people what to do. She's doing things.
Yes,
she's making things happen.
Yeah, and I don't think we got to too much of that, but she's behind Independence Landing, and that is going to be a group home. They're going to break ground, I think, at the end of the year. Don't hold me to that, but look it up. Look into what she's doing, Independence Landing. So people who are differently abled, who face challenges other people don't, can have an adult home, live like adults, independent to a large degree, and just have, in the least restrictive environment with the support they need to live their highest, best, fullest lives. And she's behind that because she wants it not for her son only, she wants it for everybody.
Absolutely, 100%. The message that I get from her story is this. This is so important. If you've been through some painful episodes, if you've had challenges in your life, that is the universe that is guiding you to overcome those challenges and then to help people. Once you get on the other side, help other people overcome those challenges. That's how you turn pain into purpose. Anyway, she's such a perfect example. We're going to go.
I went to lunch with one of my former clients the other day, and she's doing great. She took the money from her settlement and she started her own company buying and selling vehicles, which is really cool because she was in a car crash and then needed a new vehicle. And so now she's able to help other folks out.
Most of our clients, they find that one of the most frustrating things is the dealing with the vehicle.
Oh, well, losing your car can totally disrupt your life.
You can lose your livelihood over it. If you can't get to work, or you know, what's the worst thing with our clients is we're just trying to help them get well. But if they can't get to the health care that they need, you know, that's just another setback.
One of the typical things about a comeback story is you take the pain and the struggles and the challenges that you've been through and you use that as the fire that kind of motivates you to do something good for other people. And so I love that because now our client did exactly that, like literally to the T.
Welcome back to Come Back Stronger, where we just had 2 sections of an interview with Allison Tant. And Dana, I know you know Allison. We actually have a something called the Empower Hour, which is a Facebook group that Dana runs every week, and you had Allison on the Empower Hour. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the Empower Hour is part of the Empower Plan, but you can also see it on YouTube. But it's just, we have an hour Facebook Live Thursdays at 4:30. We always bring on
anybody can join.
Yeah, but we bring on people like Allison. And I wanted her on so much because we have a lot of empowered women. We have people who are changing the world, making laws, lobbying or whatever, but we don't have a lot of people who are the voice of differently abled people. And they do get forgotten. And if you ever watch, you can just watch people's behavior. Like if you run into somebody who's in a wheelchair or in a scooter at the grocery store, people ignore them. They don't make eye contact with them. They just walk past by. And you know, that's got to be so hard. You know, it's hard to hurt yourself, but whenever someone you love is hurting, it's unbearable to watch and to experience. And I just love that she was like, no, we're here. And I need all the services. I need all the help.
She wasn't going to take no for an answer, and she was going to fight for the other people who didn't quite have this advocacy skills and the voice that she had. So what a great story.
She's everything.
Thank you, Allison Tant. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for this episode of Come Back Stronger. Please join us next week, and if you know anybody that has a great comeback story, please let us know. Look forward to seeing you next time.
And you know what the insurance company offered him? $5,000.
Really?
He's completely blind, and they offer him $5,000. Ask him to sign a release.
To a lot of people, especially when they're hurting and when they're down and when they're vulnerable, $5,000 is a life-changing amount of money. And they're not looking at the value of what has been lost. They're not looking at what it would take to make that person whole, which is our job. That's our job. Their job isn't. Their job is to save the insurance company money. And they look at this person and they go, I bet $5,000 would get your full attention. And they come in and they dangle it with a settlement release, and then once you sign it, you're done. You can't come back to us and ask us to wave a magic wand and make that go away. That can't go away.
My client didn't accept the $5,000. We took him all the way to trial. We got a $5 million verdict.